but you get my drift. Um, I do think as a consumer of news, I think that we're missing something in the journalist space. Like everyone, compares like CNN and Fox's to like the Cronkite era, and obviously that era is gone anyway. But I do think we're missing something in terms of like hard hitters for journalism, rather than just like sticking to the left and the right and the, uh, you know, D's versus R's and all that nonsense. We have a couple, and as much as I'm not a fan of mainstream. I think Mehdi Hassan has brought what we see in Europe to the U.S. to some extent, and I think we need. And Democracy now does it, but they're a little bit more. They're still cordial. They're not. They're not ready to rip the guest's head off. But I do think like that the realness and not and kind of pulling away from just being polite because you want them to come back. I think that kind of hurts if we don't have the realness and the rawness and the aggressiveness in holding people accountable. As far as journalism though, no, I'm not a journalist. I try to stay active when I can, so I will go to like protests if I'm able to, and be involved in the activism aspect. But I don't consider myself a journalist, and I know that a lot of the hosts that I work with do and don't, depending on, like Ben at one point referred to himself as a journalist, but then in your interview, I think he had already like started to feel like he was growing out of that space and moving elsewhere. So there's a lot of gray zones, but unless I'm reporting, I wouldn't think of myself as a journalist. I guess in the audio visual, I guess I could be like a video journalist in that sense, but I wouldn't call myself that.
Yeah, if memory serves, Ben referred to himself as an activist and said he wanted to do more activism. And you were mentioning that too. And we talk
Yeah.
a lot about media activism here. Do you think it's a fair expectation to have of your average podcast host to inspire boots on the ground, so to speak, or some level of action in the viewers,
I
or
guess
at
it
least
depends on
advocate for it?
advocate their subject matter. I think that comes naturally. I don't think that would be forced really, because if there's a podcast about something, then I think that they're going to be advocating for what have you. It's just like Twitch, because Twitch is very niche. So when you go onto Twitch, forgetting about the big streamers, but just like the smaller communities on there, they have like streams that are dedicated to housing rights, right, or and that sort of thing. Um, so I think on the same, standard, when you're listening to a podcast, I think wherever that podcast is focused on, you're definitely gonna hear advocating and focus to that effect. As far as the activism or exciting people, it probably depends on the person. I wouldn't feel like they're obligated to encourage you to be active, right? Some people might be more in the historian vein, where they're just, teaching. So they may not, have that that energy to like give a call to action. They may just be the boring professorial type. But I think all those roles, have their own effectiveness. I do think that there is a necessity to have call to actions. If we don't have anyone doing that, if we don't have anyone fitting that role, then what are we really doing, right? I mean, we can report all we want, but especially in the indie space, people are looking for, I don't want to say they're looking for change, because change feels forever, we're just chasing it, but like some kind of action, rather than just listening to the same old talking points and same old BS that's more or less a sport. So I do think call to actions and actually like campaigns and getting somewhere with all of this is important.
I talk to people exclusively about this a lot, and what I've come to realize is that viewers, and I mean some of these channels have millions of viewers,
Hmm.
50,000 tuning in every day to watch a guy have lunch and
Hmm.
randomly talk about some stuff. A lot of people are looking for direction and for what to do next, and what to, you know, help me figure out what I should be doing, how I can get involved. And I think that they are happy to settle for what we call edutainment, where somebody's just making the information more digestible for them. And so I think you got to be doing one or the other. And
Yeah,
if you're doing
yeah,
edutainment, maybe occasionally showcase another indie news person
hmm,
who's advocating for, labor organizing or registering to vote, whatever it is, But the you talked about the mainstream media. I wonder what sort of insight do you have for how cable news is produced, and how is that different or the same to what you do? Like, is this because a lot of people in these situations are sort of like, well, I know what a talking head looks like thanks to cable news. So I know I have to sit here in front of a mic, look at the camera, have a little block up here with some video, right? I mean, we get that basis or that foundation from the mainstream media. But then it's
yeah,
sort of, well, I can get away with a lot here because it's indie. But like
right.
what's your do you have a standard that's based on the mainstream media? Do you have any
Mm,
insight to how it's different or the same?
the only standards that I try to keep is in terms of truth, not being spinny, and not presenting something in a way that I don't want, I don't want to be the left's Alex Jones.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
so there are bare minimals, like in terms of like presenting something in a way that's what you would expect, because when people are looking at indie, they're still coming out of, for the most part, most people are still coming out of, they've been their brains have been trained to see something that looks like mainstream. So when I was when we were just getting started, when I was doing the Progressive Army work, back in 2015, 2016, the video work was like, that's cringeworthy. When I've gone back and looked, and I've just been like, oh my, but you have to start somewhere, right? So
Yeah.
you're always not going to necessarily like what you've previously done, especially if it was really early on and you didn't know what you were doing. Um, but I do kind of, I want, when I'm working, I want what we're putting out to look legit, so that it can be used in spaces, not mainstream, but spaces where the work is getting done. If we want to have activists on, they're going to want to know that they're being produced, they're being presented in a way that, people are actually tuning in. If you look sloppy, are people actually watching you, unless you have the backing of, an official Twitch or YouTube contract? So I think that, you still have to look a certain way. You still have to, be welcoming the formality.